thank you for the time. Thank you for listening. And any questions you guys have, I'm open.
Great. Thank you so much, Cyrus. That was a very, very comprehensive explanation of diabetes and how they all relate with each other. So we're going to now begin our Q&A session. And I just want for the audience, I just want to go over a couple of quick things. We don't take, where can people get your book, and how can they follow you on social media?
Where can they get the book? Great question. Okay. So just go to Amazon. That's probably the best place to buy it. Just go to Amazon, literally type in the words "mastering diabetes" and it'll pop up. You can buy the book in either hardback, you can get in paperback, you can get it in audiobook. We spoke the audiobook, myself and my business partner, Robbie. And then you can also get it in Kindle format as well. And then if you want to follow on social media, literally go to any social media platform. It could be TikTok, it could be Instagram, it could be YouTube, it could be Facebook. Just type in the words "mastering diabetes" and you'll find us. We're pretty much everywhere.
Great. Thank you. All right. Sure. For the Q&A for the audience, just a couple of ground rules. We don't take questions directly from chat. You need to raise your hand in Zoom if you're not familiar with that. What you need to do is go to the reactions button second from the right and click on that, and then you'll select the raise hand function in the menu that pops up. When I call on you, I'll ask you to state your where you're from and ask your question. And we just ask the questions are brief and on topic. And I just have a couple of questions for you to get started. So you mentioned that type 1 diabetes is caused from an autoimmune, or at least yours was caused from an autoimmune response. What caused that autoimmune response? Is that documented?
Great question. The world of autoimmunity, autoimmune experts don't know the full answer to that question. They have discovered that there are multiple different factors that can increase your risk for the development of autoimmune conditions, especially type 1 diabetes, but none of them are like conclusive stories. One of them is a lot of individuals get diagnosed with type 1 diabetes after contracting a virus. In particular, there's one virus called the Coxsackie virus, and people who develop the Coxsackie virus usually won't have any symptomology. It's not like you're starting to cough or, you don't have any respiratory symptoms, but then as soon as that's over, boom, all of a sudden you can get type 1 diabetes. Other individuals actually can increase their risk by, this is interesting, consuming cow's milk protein before the age of 1. Okay, so if you were bottle fed from formula that contained cow's milk protein in it, otherwise known as casein, there's studies that demonstrate that people who consume casein end up at before approximately the year of 1, then they can end up with significantly increased risk over the course of time, like as they become an adolescent. And when in my particular situation, I went backwards in time and I said, "Hey, Mom, how long was I breastfed for?" And she goes, "Oh, I could only breastfeed you for about 2 months. Because it was really challenging for me at that point." And then I was like, "Oh, okay, well, that's really interesting information," right? I don't blame my mom in any way, shape, or form, but I think that may have contributed. I also tended to drink a ton of milk when I was a young kid. The third thing is there's another mycobacterium called MAP, which is called Mycobacterium avium paratuberculosis. Don't memorize that. But effectively, it is a mycobacterium that is found inside of the digestive tract of domesticated cows. So some domesticated cows end up, when they're in pasture, when they're being raised in like a large livestock setting, they end up developing this thing called Johne's disease. And Johne's disease basically is a muscle wasting condition. And it's caused by this MAP bacteria that's inside of their digestive tract. So what ends up happening is they end up pooping, and the fecal matter has the live MAP bacteria, and that gets onto their hooves and it gets onto the ground, and then it gets transferred to other cows and it can spread that way. So when these animals end up going for slaughter, they end up with the MAP bacteria externally, and then it gets on the gloves and it gets on the sort of like coat, the gloves and the hats and the clothes of the slaughterhouse workers. And then the MAP bacteria, what's suspected is that the MAP bacteria can end up getting packaged into meat that comes out of a slaughterhouse, literally live MAP bacteria. So it gets into dairy products and into meat. And that way, when it goes to the grocery store, it's still alive, which means that when you bring it home, there's live MAP bacteria, which when you ingest it, actually can trigger a whole collection of biological processes that increases your risk for 2 autoimmune conditions. One of them is type 1 diabetes, and the other one is Crohn's disease. And so there's some fascinating research that actually demonstrates that you can buy milk off of the shelf and you can test it for live MAP bacteria, and it tests positive in something like 3 to 5% of all milk. So it's not a very large percentage, but it is present. But people who are living with type 1 diabetes, a very large percentage of them, more than 90% of them, test positive for MAP bacteria inside of them. Right. Which is again, it's not conclusive, but it leads you to down the path that's MAP is causational in autoimmune diabetes. And it happens to be very highly concentrated in people living with type 1.
Thank you. And if people eat a very healthy diet, for the most part, eating like, a raw food diet of sprouts, green vegetables, green juices, and their blood sugars at the optimal level, is it okay if they eat some oils? And I think you said seeds were and nuts were, and avocado and olives are kind of a yellow, but like oil, is that okay?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to put oil in the no category. And I know that oil has become a very contentious food, and there's intense rivalries online about whether oil is okay or not okay. The reason I'm going to put oil in the no category, if you take a look at the screen here, is you'll see oils right here. It says oils of any kind: olive oil, coconut oil, canola oil, avocado oil, walnut oil, MCT oil, you name it, any kind of oil. We put it in the red light category specifically. And the reason is because what the research shows is that oil can be part of a quote unquote healthy whole food plant-based diet for non-diseased individuals. But for individuals who are living with a pre-existing chronic condition, including either heart disease or diabetes, adding oil to your diet you have to be much, much more selective about how much oil goes into your food. And what we have found empirically is that small amounts of oil, people are like, oh man, I don't even use that much. I just use like a tablespoon per day and I coat my vegetables with it. And that's what allows them to taste good. And even something as small as 1 tablespoon per day can add a significant number of calories, which can make weight loss challenging, but it still causes significant blood glucose irregularity. So what we say is that if you're living with a blood glucose irregularity, aka type 1 prediabetes or type 2, then my recommendation is cut out oil. Just be done with it. Okay. And you don't have to do it overnight. Again, ramp it down over the course of time and get to a point where your future self doesn't use oil. And if it happens to be present in your food every once in a while, don't worry about that, but try not to add oil to your food. And that is going to be a significant, it's going to be a tool in your toolbox that will have a significant and immediate impact on your blood glucose control.
Okay. Awesome. And does eating your diet, this diet, just a whole food plant-based diet as you laid it out, does that prevent all of the corollary diseases that you showed when you showed that circle? Does that prevent all of them? You wouldn't expect to go blind, to get renal failure, heart disease?
Yeah. Okay. So let me put that slide on the screen one more time. So this way of eating, I have to be careful about the words I choose. If I say eating this way is going to completely prevent all of these conditions, I would be lying to you. Mm-hmm. And the reason I say that is because eating a whole food plant-based diet that is low in fat that comes from whole foods is going to significantly reduce your risk for the development of all of these conditions. Will your risk go to 0? It may not. It depends on so many variables. It depends on many other aspects of your lifestyle, right? How much alcohol do you drink? Do you smoke cigarettes? What is the stress level in your daily life? Do you exercise? If so, how much? What type of exercise? And the list goes on, right? But eating this way is one of the most effective tools that you have in your toolbox to effectively quiet down or reduce your risk for all of the conditions that you see on the screen here. The only one condition that I would say you can't really reduce your risk of, I'd say 3 conditions actually, is type 1 and 1.5 diabetes, because again, those pre-exist before you transition to this type of diet. And then PCOS, because this is a congenital condition that women develop. But again, when you're living with PCOS, this can help reduce the symptomology of PCOS. But for the rest of the conditions here, it can significantly reduce your risk for your opportunity to develop them into the future.
And are there any reported cases of anyone ever reversing type 1 diabetes?
That's a great question. People who reverse, and so the answer is no. People who claim to have reversed type 1 diabetes don't have, they either did it in one of two scenarios. They either weren't living with type 1 diabetes, they thought they were, but they were living with type 1.5 diabetes, which is adult onset, slow progressing version of type 1 diabetes. Okay. And or basically still have some residual pancreatic function. That's what I'm trying to get at, right? So people with type 1 diabetes have zero insulin production, literally make zero insulin. But if you're living with type 1.5 diabetes, you don't have zero insulin production. You have some insulin production. You might have, 20% still remaining insulin production. As a result of that, you can eat a whole food plant-based diet and get to a point where you're like, oh my God, I have autoimmune diabetes and I don't need any insulin. But because you're still manufacturing insulin, you're technically not a type 1. Let's just put it that way.
Right.
And then secondarily, the other type of people are basically people who are newly diagnosed with type 1 diabetes and catch it like right off the bat. Those are the only people that may be able to stand a chance at like reversing the entire pathology, even though I haven't read about those people, I haven't met them. But I think that it is potentially possible for those people to completely reverse type 1.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to throw some questions from the audience here.
Sure.
Nancy, where are you from, and what is your question?
Hi, I have a question. So my doctor told me not to eat potatoes or sweet potatoes. So that's, I believe, I'm borderlining pre-diabetes to type 2 diabetes. I've been teetering it now with it for 2 years. So I really haven't got my hands around it, honestly, with respect to my diet. But
Sure.
This conference has, hopefully brought out the best in me. So my question is, it says that you think that starchy vegetables are okay, but she said not okay. So what should I do? Because I really like sweet potatoes, and I could make that a good piece of my diet if it's something that I should be doing. What do you recommend?
Yeah, my answer to you is potatoes are in the green light category. So again, if you avoid eating potatoes, then effectively the reason why doctors believe that is the right scenario is because they are operating in the old world, which says potatoes contain carbohydrate metabolizes sugar, and that's a bad thing. Okay. Potatoes contain whole carbohydrate material, and the only way to be able to effectively metabolize potatoes and other carbohydrate rich foods like fruits and legumes and whole grains is if your fat content is between 10 and 15% of total calories. So my suggestion to you is don't focus on the potato, focus on the fat rich foods in your diet. If oil is in your diet, get it down. If there's a lot of avocado in your diet, get it down. If there's red meat, white meat, chicken, fish, other fat rich foods, get them down. Once you do that, your carbohydrate tolerance increases significantly. Your ability to metabolize white potatoes, purple potatoes, black potatoes, sweet potatoes, anything you want goes significantly up, and your blood glucose is going to be very well controlled. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yep. Thanks.
Cool.
All right. And how long does it take usually for someone who is following the protocol that you laid out to reverse their insulin resistance?
It's a good question. So I'm going to say a minimum of like 3 months and a maximum of about 2 years. Okay. And it depends on the number of factors. The people who can do it in 3 months are people who are like super dedicated to the process and already have many other aspects of their lifestyle, hammered out. These are the type of people that can act quickly, and they can basically not only transition to a whole food plant-based diet that's low in fat, but also exercise regularly and also perform some intermittent fasting either on a daily or weekly basis, and also eliminate alcohol or significantly reduce alcohol consumption, and also live in a low stress environment. If you can execute all of that and you can be very consistent about that, then expect it could take you as little as 3 months, maybe 6 months. But for other people who, maybe they have a significant amount of weight to lose, they have to lose 40, 50, 60, 100, 150 pounds. Maybe they're sedentary, maybe they drink a little bit of alcohol, et cetera, et cetera. For those individuals, we have to extend the timeline to maybe close to 9 months, a year and a half. But both of them require very consistent behavior. And if you can be very consistent in your behavior, then you're going to stand the greatest chance of keeping that timeline as small as possible.
Okay. Next question is going to Roger. Where are you from, and what is your question?
Roger Taz.
Roger, you have a serious echo going on there. If you can shut off, maybe you're listening to two devices.
Okay, I shut it off.
There you go.
I didn't know that was going to happen. Roger Test, Cokeville, Wyoming. Cyrus, what to you is the most convincing evidence that insulin resistance is caused by fat in the cells?
Great question. There were papers that were written by an individual, his researcher, his name is Jared Shulman. He's out of Yale University. I saw him talk when I was at graduate school, and he is one of the most prolific researchers in this world of insulin resistance. He's written countless articles on this subject, and him and his research team have dissected in grave detail the actual mechanism of insulin resistance inside of humans. They show it inside of liver cells. They show it inside of muscle. And they were the first ones that opened my eyes to the actual mechanism that I showed you earlier, right? And there's actually like more complexity that we can get into. But the idea here is that saturated fat gets inside of a cellular environment. It then gives rise to other lipid metabolites. One of them are called ceramides. Those go and they dock on the intracellular domain of the insulin receptor, cause the insulin receptor to become less functional. Then insulin tries to bind on the outside, can't do it. So they've dissected this pathway in grave detail. And then there are other research groups that have built upon their research and shown it over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. And one of the reasons why it's so convincing is because, number one, the mechanism is very systematic, and like I've gone through the research process many times over, and to see just how exquisite they are in their research abilities and how detailed they are is just mind-boggling. And in addition to that, one of the things that makes good science is its ability to be replicated. So good science basically means you can perform an experiment, and you can be very detailed with exactly what you did and give everybody the answer key and say, hey, look, this is exactly how we got this response. And then somebody else can go try and replicate it. If they can get the response, and then another group does, and then another group does, and another group does, that means it's likely to be true, and you didn't just make up your original research. So the fact that it's repeatable, and the fact that so many other research groups around the world who are very good at studying the molecular mechanism of insulin resistance have replicated their work leads me to believe that there's no reason to doubt that it's right. Does that answer your question?
He muted himself, so
Okay.
but it answered it for me. So another question for you is, what would be an indication for someone who has type 1 diabetes that they are now insulin resistant?
Good question. So if you're living with type 1 diabetes and you're insulin resistant, there could be many different symptoms of that. Number one, your ability to consume carbohydrates is very low. In other words, if you eat one fruit, your blood glucose goes quite high and you have to inject a lot of insulin. If you eat 2 fruits, if you eat 3 fruits, if you're eating small amounts of carbohydrate that are, on the order of anywhere from like 25 to 75 grams of carbohydrate, and you have to inject 5 units, 6 units, 7 units, 10 units, 15 units, and your blood glucose is doing some very strange things in the process, that's a very strong indicator that your actual carbohydrate tolerance is low. And every time you eat those foods, you're overwhelming your muscle and liver with the ability to metabolize that glucose. And that's requiring a lot of insulin. So that's my number one indicator for you. But number two, low energy is always a really strong indicator of insulin resistance because people report that left and right. And then number 3 would be effectively, you can measure your carbohydrate to insulin ratio. So if you did the same calculation that I did earlier, where I said the total amount of carbohydrate that I eat per day is blank, and the total amount of insulin that I use per day is blank, and you just do some simple math and you divide the two numbers by one another, if that number that you end up with is something less than about 10 to 1, then you're likely living in an insulin resistant state. So just for clarification here, on a previous low carbohydrate diet, I was 125 total grams divided by 42 units of insulin. So 125 divided by 42 is approximately 3 to 1. So this right here is an indicator that I'm in an insulin resistant state because it's less than 10 to 1. When I switched over here and I went 650 divided by 24, now I'm into 27 to 1 category. This is a significantly larger number, greater than 10 to 1. And that right there indicates that I'm in the insulin sensitive zone. So do this calculation for yourself and figure out what your number is. If you're below 10, treat it. If you're above 10, Still treat it, but at least you give yourself some baseline indicators.
Okay, our next question is coming from Marley. Marley, where are you from, and what is your question?
Hi, Cyrus. Hi, everyone. I'm from South Florida, Hollywood, Florida. So excited
Cool.
to see you here, Cyrus. I follow you. I have a lot of questions, but I'm only going to ask you like one. I have so many. Acai, you mentioned it. I love acai, and maple syrup I use for dressings. How do you feel about those in the green zone?
Okay. Acai, I eat acai every single day. So I'm in the same boat as you. I love it. There's not all acai is created equal. A lot of the acai packets contain like added sugar inside of them. So just be a detective and read the actual back of the package. And if you find sugar in it, then try and find one that's sugar-free. But I think your question was, you add maple syrup as a dressing, meaning like on top of the bowl or inside?
No, like when I make a dressing, like I follow the Esselsteins and they make a lot of dressings with like a tablespoon with a couple of vinegar and something else or strawberries in it. So I use like a tablespoon mixed with other ingredients to make a salad dressing per se, and then I put it over the salad dressing.
Got it. Okay, cool. So I'm not gonna come down on you and say, oh, you should never do that, right? If you're doing that and it's working for you and your blood glucose is relatively well controlled, then change nothing. Okay. The indicator that maybe, that amount of maple syrup is too much, or it's causing blood glucose problems do you check your blood glucose on a daily?
I don't. I'm pretty healthy and I don't have any medical conditions. I'm 53 and my BMI is like 19, 20. So I'm pretty healthy.
Okay. And are you eating a whole food plant-based diet?
I would say about 90 to 95%.
Okay. And do you happen to know what your fat content is in general?
No, I don't.
No. Okay.
I exercise, but I don't know the actual fat content.
Okay. So for you and for anyone else who's interested in learning that information, download an app. It's called Chronometer, Cronometer. It's an exceptional app, and it allows you to log your food intake. And you can say, I had 3 bananas here, and I had 1 bowl of oatmeal here, and I had an acai packet here, and so on and so forth. You just put all your food in, and then it'll do the math for you in the background. And it'll basically say, okay, great. Marley, you had this many grams of carbohydrate, this many grams of fat, this many grams of protein, and it kind of gives you the breakdown. Yeah. What I want you to pay attention to is put all your food in there for like a 3-day period. And what you're looking for is your total fat content to be less than 30 grams of fat per day. That's the sort of like magic threshold.
Yes.
You can keep your fat intake to less than 30 grams of fat per day. Then I will allow you to put maple syrup into your food.
Okay.
If your fat content is greater than 30, then maple syrup could cause problems down the road. Just a simple.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much.
And can you say that app one more time? Someone's asking in the chat.
Yeah, sure. It's called Chronometer, Cronometer.
All right. Perfect. Thank you. Okay. Our next question is going to come from Anatina. Please tell us where you're from and ask.
Thank you. I'm from New York. First of all, thank you, Cyrus, for your outstanding, clear presentation and your beautiful, inspiring attitude.
Awesome. Thank you.
The beautiful smile helps too. I have 2 little questions. One is, has anybody studied if slaughterhouse workers and their families have higher incidence of type 1 diabetes?
Oh, that's a great, it could exist, but I have not read it. So that's a great question.
And the other question, what became of your Hashimoto's?
What became of Hashimoto's? Good question. My Hashimoto's basically got to a point where the way that I measure my, the severity of Hashimoto's is based off of how much thyroid hormone I have to take on a daily basis. So my thyroid hormone was creeping up from 37.5 micrograms to 62 to 75 to 115 to all the way upwards of 150 micrograms per day. That's where it peaked. And then from that point, it has actually come down to 112 and then stabilized at 125. So my response to you is, I wish I had caught Hashimoto's earlier, because then I would have potentially standed a chance of actually reversing it. I can't say that I've made significant progress in it. I've just prevented it from getting any worse than it was. It was accelerating very quickly at the beginning of the disease process. I've arrested that progression and brought it down just a little bit.
Okay, thank you.
For sure. Do you have Hashimoto's as well, by any chance?
No, I don't have anything.
Good. Let's keep it that way.
All right, very proactive audience. So I want to thank you. We've come to the end of our Q&A. So thank you so much for all the amazing information. If we can unmute the audience, please.
Thank you.
Thank you.